channel. You're watching Bare Knuckle Binder. Since the last video, I shaved off my full beard, so not trying to weird you out, just trying to keep mom happy around here. So this episode, I'm working on the Coleman axle. If you just tuned into the channel for the first time, we're working on the 1952 International L-122. It's a 3/4 ton truck and it has a Coleman 4-wheel drive conversion. Since the last video, a gentleman named Stu McMillan reached out to me, and Stu is the man when it comes to vintage wheels, and he sent me so much information already about the wheels and the clamps that this Coleman setup uses, down to the model numbers and of the rims and the clamps, and Goodyear company literature that basically confirms exactly what my theory was about those rims, that you had the wheel discs and then they just would they would double as clamp on with the beveled 28-degree clamp on. The rims were definitely Goodyear territory, but now we're getting into the Coleman stuff. I tore down the driver's side of this axle 2 days ago, and I learned a lot. I learned about how it goes together, I learned about how it comes apart, but I found something in the axle that is very interesting and could mean something very cool. One of the major questions about this truck is when it was converted to 4-wheel drive. There's a few possibilities. The first possibility, which would be the most historically significant in my eyes, is that it had the Coleman conversion installed on the assembly line in the International factory, or as I understand it, they had a Coleman installer in Springfield and Fort Wayne, and when they needed a Coleman conversion, they would build the truck out, ship it out to the Coleman installer, and then ship it back to the factory and then send it out to the customer. 2, it could have been installed either by the International dealership in California, where we believe this truck was originally sold, or 3, it could have been converted after it was sold by just a Coleman installer, and sometimes the dealership, from what I understand, would send it out to the local Coleman installer. Now, what I found yesterday kind of leans towards this was installed on the assembly line. There's no way to really tell unless more records surface, but it's just really cool stuff. So anyway, let's get into this. All right, so here's our hub. Like we were talking about before on those wheels in the last video, this is an indent on the hub that clearances for the valve stem. So the valve stem would be right here, and those 2 blocks on the rim would go right here. Now, this one looks like it was more in the dirt than the other one. You can see here the ground line. It sat without a rim on it, without the wedges, without bolts, so these bolt holes are full of dirt, so I'm gonna have to chase those out with the tap, obviously, but I'm gonna have this whole thing sandblasted. I've got some denting here that I gotta work out too. So these are the holes for the wedges, 6 of them, and then there's 2 1/2-inch bolts here, and these hold the dome on for when you take the wedges off, so the dome doesn't just fall off. All right, so this is the inside of the hub. The interesting thing about a Coleman inside the hub is that it has solid axle shafts. There's no knuckle on the axle shaft. So this is actually an International axle shaft, a rear axle shaft. And so it's got the part number, it's got the IH on it right there. From what I understand, Coleman would build stuff proprietary to the model of the truck that was going on, like the make of the truck. So like we talked about before in the first video about this truck, it has an International differential in the tube, and we'll go over that after I get this apart. Zoomed in a little bit so you can see how this works more. So how it turns is, you can see there's a gyroscope-like mechanism here where there's pivots here and here, and then there's 2 spindle bearings on the inside that allow it to turn, and this axis just compensates for that. So anyway, so there's slight movement in these pretty much all the time whenever it's rolling, just compensating for the turning of the spindles. And then there's two massive bearings here, outer and inner wheel bearings, that are about this big, but we're gonna take it apart real quick and I'll show you how that looks. Also, it's worth noting that on every other stock Coleman that I've seen, or well-maintained, these have been either wired together or they've had keepers on them. When I went to the other side, I found that somebody had really bungled it up. They've been in there, understandably, didn't look like they know what they were doing, which, you know, as rare as these are, that makes sense. They did it without really breaking much, but there's some stuff that I might have to get remachined because obviously these parts are not available at all. Luckily, it's kind of small stuff. There might be some stuff I have to weld. We'll get into that. Axle shaft coming out. There's one. All right, so now with the axle shaft out, we have to take this ring out. There's a bolt here and a keeper bolt down there. Now these two pins are what hold it in, and they're just kind of held in place with those things, and they come out of the hub on these plumbing plugs, which is a 3/8 little plug. So I'll get those out. It's hard to see it in there with the current light situation, but this is what they actually look like. So it's down in there like so, and then it has this, so you can aim it, and so this notch here is where that keeper bolt holds it in place. All right, so the keeper bolt's out. So these pins, yeah, you can see them there. They have a 3/8 24 thread on the inside, but if these first ones I took out were any indication, I couldn't even thread anything into them because the ends are kind of gnarled up. So we're gonna see what we can do about getting these out. All right, so what I was able to grab it with was a tap, pull it out. So there's a pin. It's hard to tell until you get them cleaned up. There's your Coleman part number right there, C4054. This one actually looks to be in better shape than my other two that I took out already, but I'll get them all cleaned up, and then that'll be the actual answer if you see any cracks or anything. Both pins are out now, so this thing just kind of loose in there. It comes right out. So the thing that I want to replace on this and the other side are these bushings, so I've got to get measurements on those. And possibly I need to get 2 new pins remachined, possibly 4. I haven't been, as I said, I'll clean up the other ones on this side and see what they look like. All right, so next thing to take apart is this. This is like a front plate of the hub here, and in here you got the, you know, basically the spindle. And so this here is a single plate, 6 bolts. There's studs on this side and the other side, and a single bolt. When I put it back together, I believe it's supposed to be bolts with keepers. So I'm planning on doing that. These are shims, so they got to go back. And I've heard about these being made out of aluminum and being completely destroyed, but these are actually brass and they look to be in pretty great shape, so I'll probably be reusing them, same as on the other side. But one thing to note here is that this side has a ton of grease coming out the back side of this. It's way greasier than the other side, and here's, I just found out why, is that this is supposed to have a rubber seal that goes all the way around it. There's a really good video of a guy putting together a Coleman axle for a Minneapolis Moline tractor that helped me get this one apart, actually. And he actually had to have the rubber seals made, because obviously with this, there's no parts for these. So pretty much anything you need, you have to get it made or make it yourself. What we're looking at here, this is the outer wheel bearing. This is the outer hub seal. So the fact that that is gone, it's gone. I mean, there's just some random grease packed in there. That explains why all of this is had grease leaked out in it. On the other side, the bearings all looked really good, which is handy because I priced those out, and the ones I was able to find were over $700 a piece. So, hoping these are still good. At this point, I should be able to yank this hub. Being careful here because I'm trying to get this bearing before the hub, because I want to get the bearing out to prevent any possible damage to it. I'm just gonna put a rag down here below in case it falls to keep it from dinging. Oh, there she is. It's a big ass bearing. All right, so now this hub's got to come off. Oh. And there's your brake drum on the inside. So clearly these brakes have not been doing much other than providing a habitat for spiders in the recent past. There's your inner bearing, and this is a bearing spacer. Just looking at it now, looks much better than the other side. The other side, somebody was in there that did not know what they were doing. Again, you can't blame them, but it's pretty gnarled up. This here's our drum now. The hub, and then the brake drum is bolted to the back. Another thing that was missing on the other side was any type of brake hold down hardware. Right here you can see it's got these little horseshoe clips, and on the other side I was trying to figure out what kind of clips they had. The problem was the brake shoes are coming forward, as they do without hold down hardware, and so this part of the shoe was rounded off, and the bolts that bolt the drum to the hub were getting wear marks on them. So all right, so I just did a quick vacuum job on this thing to keep some of the dirt and spider webs, and these look like they're caked with mud, keep them off of both the bearings and the shop floor as much as possible. Just makes it much more livable. So right here, this is where the inner seal for the hub is. It's still intact, but I mean, it also needs to be replaced. So I need to get 4 seals made for this thing, and probably some extras just to have on hand. Like I was saying, this bearing spacer, this keeps the bearings exactly where they need to be inside the hub. This is removed. You have to relieve the pressure. There's a bolt that pushes a wedge up here, and this is the wedge. On the other side, somebody really messed it up. The spacer's all gnarled up, and this one looks like it's perfect shape. But like I said, until you get them cleaned up in the parts washer, you never know. How this wedge is held in here is there's a bolt in the back, inside the back of the hub, between the backing plate and everything. And you back off the pressure on that bolt, and then this wedge can move back. And this actually is made to set the preload on the spindle bearings. It does that by pushing against this bearing spacer. So you can't move this until you back the pressure off of this, and hopefully it should just come right off. Now we're on the back side of it, and this here is the bolt that we have to back off. This bolt is the one that on the other side got me so excited, and we'll see if this is the case with this one, and I'll show you why. So this is the bolt out. You set the bearing preload, like I said, with this bolt, and then this is the keeper nut. And that's what pushes against that wedge. Now in the other one, look like this. It looks like they're different. But I'll show you why I was so excited about this one when I saw it, because it was all crusted up like this one with dirt and crap. But then when I cleaned it up, it had that on it, which obviously is an International Harvester bolt. And this is not a bolt that International would have for anything else. So let's clean up this bolt and see what it's got on it. So here are bolts again. This is the International bolt. This one looks to me like it's the most original. And then this one, I cleaned it up and it looks like a random bolt that's been machined. I don't know if you can see this, but it's actually bowed. So this is probably a lower grade bolt. There's no way to tell. Like I said, until further documentation might surface someday, but it really looks like this could have been assembly line, but we'll never know. If this was gonna have an IH on it, if this was an original bolt, then I would have thought, man, that's a pretty good indication. Never gonna know for sure, but oh well. Now we've got the preload adjustment bolt out. This is the wedge, so this needs to be driven back. Try a little bit of pressure on it, but what I had to do on the other side was I had to drive it back with a punch. Like I said, none of these pieces are, there's no replacements. So what I had to do is I took a chisel and I flattened out the end, because what I'm trying to avoid is gouging this thing up in any way, but we do need it to move back. So the way to do that is to punch her back. So now she's all the way back, and this just slides off. On the other side that somebody was in already, I don't think they understood how this worked. And so what they did is they drove it off with chisels and punches, and the other side, the hub is just, the spindle's just all gnarled up. So that's something I have to clean up, but luckily on this side, it works exactly like it was designed. And once that's loosened up, this just slides right off. Now to get the bearing out of here on its seat, there are 2 holes in the back that you can access with a punch, and they meet up with the hardy part of the bearing there, and you can just drive it right off. Here's one of the holes to drive it out with a punch. And then here on the other side, this is the other hole. Now on the other side, because this spindle was so completely gnarled up, I had to fight the bearing off until the bitter end. So I actually had to take this punch and then whittle it down, because I don't have a lathe, but whittle it down so that I could reach all the way up to the end there. But hopefully this one, once it gets past the seat, should come off, but we'll see. Well, that was pretty easy. Well, what are you held up on? Bearing number 2. Next step is to take the shoes off. It's a real pain. You can't take the wheel cylinder off until you have the backing plate off. Just how it's made, but it doesn't clearance the bolts enough to get a wrench on it. So what we got to do is we got to take the shoes off, and then we can unbolt it. The backing plate is bolted in 4 places, and then you can turn it and clearance it off of this. But if the bearing's still on here, it's just not enough clearance to get off of here. So you have to take this all off to redo the brakes. And that's probably why anybody was in the other side of the axle in the first place. I don't know if we mentioned it, in the first video or not, but when we looked at the speedometer, the odometer in the truck had over 80,000 miles on it. Now, 80,000 miles on a modern car is not much, but if you saw the oil filter adapter video I made for my M5H6, 80,000 miles on a vintage motor is considerable mileage. I'm sure the motor was taken out because it was probably no good, or maybe they wanted to replace it at some point, or I don't know, but the long and short of it is that this is a heavy truck for a 3/4 ton, and with 80,000 miles on it, I'm sure they had to do the brakes at least once. They need it again. You can see here, this is the front of the axle, and this is a secondary, and it's down about, I would say that's maybe 1/8 of an inch on a 5/16 shoe. So, I mean, that's pretty worn out. There's one clip. Second clip. With both hold down clips and the spring off, these are just flapping by the anchors. Now the anchors on this are the old style. If you've got a KB International, KAKB, or an FA50 or 140, 160 series International, it works in the same way. Your adjustments on the back here, one up there, and then one down at the bottom behind that steering arm, and there's one over there. So the anchors are right here. There's also the adjustments, so these have a cam inside them. So basically you just have to grab on this with a vice grips and just run the nut off, and it'll all come out. The next step is to get the backing plate off. So we've got a bolt here, and one here, and here at the bottom. So gotta get those off. Now we got to take this piece off, this round part here, and this is where the wedge rides in. The wedge goes right there. This is actually the housing for the bearing race for the swivel bearing, and then the lower bearing is underneath here. But there's a hole here, and there's one that matches up on the top, and those are to drive out the bearings to be able to get this thing off. So I'll show you that now. There it is. There's the race. Now you can see there's a movement. The bearing race. But I didn't have to do it because it's loose already. So that guy comes off. And the bearings in there in the bottom. It's actually holes in the bottom I can poke up through to get the bearing cone out of there, but I'll do that later. We're just taking this thing apart. All right, so the last part of this teardown is this spindle. One thing to keep in mind is that these have grease zerks on the back here, one on the top, one on the bottom for the two bearings, and they go towards the front of the axle, which of course with a front driving axle, the diff is in the back, so this is the front. In the video I saw with the gentleman reassembling the Minneapolis Moline Coleman front driving axle, it's very important, as he said, to get them in the correct position. So I think I'll do the same thing that he did, where he cleared off a boss and then stamped in top left, or in this case top right. So I think I'll do that to these once I get them cleaned up. So in the meantime, I'll just tag them with some paper tags. Take all the bottom ones off first, leave the top one in just for an anchor. But this one's stuck in there pretty good, so comes right off. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll remember the junkyard where I had to build the S-160's front axle because it was built with a defective axle seal. Now, so this one kind of gives me flashbacks to that, because I don't know if you noticed, when I pulled out those drive shafts, it's got a collar on it. This one right here, it's got a collar on it. So this is your sealing surface. Here's the interesting thing. I haven't taken the differential out yet. So there it is and all the way. Now, let me get the camera and show you what the problem is. All right, so there's the seal, there's the collar. So the seal is right about here, and both these collars, I've noticed, are way back here. So yeah, I'm gonna have to replace those seals just because I'm in here, but it doesn't look like those seals have been having to do too much because the sealing surface is all the way back here. So I'm gonna have to find some collars to match that ID and weld them on up here so that I've got a sealing surface. Weird. All right, so that wraps it up for the Coleman axle teardown. We've got it torn down to just the axle tube and the differential. The differential is a 477 reduction. So with the tires that I'm planning to put on this thing, which are 916, with those tires and this reduction, we're looking at a road speed of about, 55 on the top end, which is pretty slow. Obviously, I'm used to driving old trucks on the road and trying to figure out little hacks just to get them a little more livable under today's conditions, because everyone drives like an idiot nowadays and speeding all over the place. But if you can get an old truck to cruise at about 60, that reduces a lot of the stress. So the trick I'm going to use for this truck is that I have several 411 differentials for old Internationals laying around. They'll bolt right in, and then that means cruising about 2,500 RPMs, not over upping the motor, just basically a good cruising speed. We'll be rolling right around 60 with those tires. With that said, as far as this whole project is concerned, I'm feeling pretty good about it, because every step of the way, obviously I'm learning a lot more as I go through it. There's very few dudes out there who you can actually say are Coleman experts. I'm not even gonna be a Coleman expert by the time I'm done with this, but at least I'll understand how this one works completely. The things that we've learned already going through this with the wheels, and now know, thanks to Mr. McMillan, with the Goodyear rims, I know exactly what I need to do. I've actually, since that last video and talking to Stu, I've sourced a set of original International Goodyear rims that I'll drilling out the rivets and the wheel centers out of them. Those rims will be exactly what I need. And the cool thing about it is that these wheels were scheduled to have the exact same thing done to them anyway, because they belong to my buddy Doug in Amarillo, and he was hoping to take those wheel centers out and send them off to Stockton Wheel and have modern tubeless rims put on them. So nothing's going to the junkyard, nothing's getting ruined, making like Native Americans using every part of the buffalo. But as far as what I've done here today and the other side the other day, what I've learned is that I need to have several parts machined and one replacement seal made. Parts I need machined obviously are the collars for the axle shafts to get that sealing position right for the axle seal. And then two, I need to get the pins for the power ring. The driver's side are cracked. The passenger side, they look better. I haven't got them all the way cleaned up yet. They might be cracked anyway. And even if they're not cracked, having a few spares in perfect condition is gonna be a nice thing. I need to also get some replacement grade 8 bolts to replace the bearing preload bolt, one of which had the IH on it that I was so excited about. And the other one, the shoddily made replacement. Got some wasps coming in here. Shoddily made replacement that bowed out. I've got to make replacements for those. And then, as far as parts are concerned, I need to get seals made for those spindle seals, the hub seals on the front and back, on both sides. So that's 4 of those. And then oil light bushings for the power ring for those pins, because they're a little loose and worn. And as long as I'm in here, might as well do it. Anything worth doing, obviously, it's at least worth doing right. But if you can, worth overdoing. So that stuff will keep me busy while I'm cleaning up the rest of these parts, if I'm gonna have to wait on stuff to get machined. I'm gonna take this axle tube and get it all sandblasted. The hubs I can pretty much do with a wire wheel and get pretty good results, but all the nooks and crannies on this need to sandblast it. Anyway, I'm talking a lot. This is boring, huh? All right, so like and subscribe, and what's the other thing I have to say? Turn on your notifications. I don't even really know what that means. So anyway, you should do that. And if you got any Coleman info, like I said in the wheel video, please hit me up in the comments, reach out to me, whatever. I want to know. This project is definitely progressing faster as people reach out to me with any info that they might have. Some of it's helpful, some of it's not, but no matter what, I appreciate all of it. So that said, I'll see you in the next video, and be good.